The court jester earned a place at the side of kings for reasons far more serious than making people laugh. Behind the bells and the painted face stood one of the only person in the entire kingdom permitted to speak plainly to a monarch about matters that could get anyone else executed. Jesters observed court politics up close every single day, watched alliances form and crumble, and used comedy as a delivery system for commentary that nobles whispered about in private but never dared to say aloud in the throne room. That is what we're getting into today. Stick around because this history gets darker and stranger the deeper you go. If you want more stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. The protection that made this possible had a name: license. This was a recognized social and sometimes legal understanding that granted the full immunity from punishment. A jester could mock a king's decisions, question a queen's judgment, or point out the absurdity of a court decree, and the performance itself acted as a shield. The joke was the container, and inside that container lived real political criticism that reached the ruler's ears in a form they could absorb without losing face in front of their court. This function made the jester something like a pressure release for the ego of an absolute ruler. Kings and queens were surrounded by flattery, told constantly that their word was law and their judgment infallible. And that kind of isolation warps a person's grip on reality. The jester's job was to puncture that illusion just enough, reminding the sovereign through laughter that they were still human, still capable of foolishness, and still subject to consequence. In a world with no free press and no public opinion to check a monarch's power, the fool in Motley may have been one of the only voices keeping absolute power tethered to the ground. Behind the entertainment, value placed on so-called natural fools lay a practice that modern audiences would recognize instantly as exploitation. These were people born with physical differences, development disabilities, or mental illnesses, and courts across Europe sought them out specifically because their conditions made them objects of fascination and ridicule. Nobility paid handsomely to keep such individuals close, watching the confusion or the unusual movements as a form of amusement, and treating human suffering as a permanent fixture of court entertainment rather than something requiring care or dignity. Artificial fools faced a different but equally disturbing set of circumstances. These were performers without natural differences who were shaped deliberately into the role, sometimes through diet or physical conditioning meant to alter their appearance, and always through clothing designed to broadcast their subhuman status within the court hierarchy. The motley itself, with its clashing colors and asymmetrical design, marked the wearer as someone outside normal social order, a person whose humiliation was written into the very fabric they wore each day. Belts, hoods shaped like donkey ears, and exaggerated patterns turned the body into a walking symbol of degradation that everyone in the room understood on sight. Living inside the wealthiest rooms in the kingdom did nothing to soften the isolation these individuals experienced. A jester ate in the halls of kings and slept under gilded ceilings while remaining fundamentally alone, cut off from marriage, from ordinary friendship, from any life outside the narrow role assigned to them. Their days consisted of constant performance, with no private self allowed to surface, and no moment where they existed as anything other than the court's source of amusement. Surrounded by opulence, They experienced a kind of solitary confinement that had nothing to do with physical walls and everything to do with the permanent distance placed between them and the rest of humanity. Every joke a jester told required split-second calculations that few professions have ever demanded. The fool had to read the sovereign's mood, gauge the temperature of the room, and judge exactly how far a piece of wit could travel before it tipped from clever into treasonous. This calculated insolence meant walking a line where the joke told on a good day earned laughter and gifts, and told on a bad day earned a dungeon cell. The skill required was not comedic timing in the modern sense, but something closer to reading the internal weather of the most powerful and unpredictable person in the room. History holds documented cases where that judgment failed catastrophically. Jesters have been recorded receiving public floggings for jokes that landed wrong. Others were thrown into prison for commentary a ruler decided was disloyal rather than funny. And in the most extreme accounts, a fool's life ended entirely because a monarch's patient ran out at the wrong moment. These punishments served a dual purpose beyond simple retribution, reminding the fool and everyone watching that license had limits and that the protection granted by the royal could be revoked instantly at the sovereign's whim. Underneath all this sat the exhausting demand of being perpetually available as emotional labor for someone who held the power of life and death. A jester could never simply have a bad day, could never retreat from performance the way other members of the household might slip away for their duties. Every hour spent near the monarch required alertness and required reading tension in a jaw or frustration in a raised voice, and required producing exactly the right response to diffuse it. Serving as a constant buffer for a ruler's temper meant the fool carried the emotional weight of an entire court's stability on their shoulders, day after day, with no acknowledgement that the performance was in fact one of the hardest jobs in the palace. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.